Good morning, everybody. We had great walk-in music, so we ready to get the party started? Yes. All right. Well, first things first, if you haven't already, please download the mobile app because we've got a poll. And there's going to be Q&A that's toward the end of the session. And the only way I can see your questions is if you put them in through the app. So, I'd like to introduce panelists. So I'll start with Tanya, give you a minute to say who you are.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I am Tanya Perry. I am the Vice President of Fusion Performance Group. We're a third-party agency. I will admit to my age and say that I have over 30 years of experience in the corporate event planning industry. The first 20 years, a couple decades, was on the corporate side. So I worked for industry giants, LG and American Express, and even the Dodgers.
Oh, wow.
And then for about the past 10 years, I have worked with an amazing group of humans, with all this AI talk, who make up Fusion Performance Group. And we work for creative solutions to meet our customers' needs and drive results. And I like long walks on the beach, too. Thank you very much for coming. We have a full house. It's very nice to see you all here.
Yes. Great. Gary, how about you?
Yes, so good morning, everyone. My name is Gary Murakami. I'm the VP of Global Sales and Industry Relations for Teneo Hospitality Group. We're a representation company that represents about 400 independent as well as branded hotels. So it's a unique conversation to be able to have visibility into not only the way independent hotels operate, but also many of the brands that include the Omni, some of the IHG properties, and One Hotels, as well as some of the largest properties in Vegas. My previous experience also includes sales leadership roles at companies like Ritz-Carlton, Four Seasons, and Hyatt, and MGM Resorts. And I have a dual role, too, being part of the corporate leadership team of our company, being involved in industry relations, where I sit on different industry organization boards of directors. So I'm excited to be here and to have this conversation about contracting.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, and I'm Therese Jardine, and my company is Strategic Event Procurement, and it was born out of my experience that I gained at Microsoft actually building the strategic meeting management program there and the hotel contracting program for meetings and events. And I know Gary because he was my rep when he was at MGM.
Many years ago.
So I like to say I take the pain out of procurement for events. And happy to have all of you here, so many faces in the crowd, some of whom I know, and some who I hope to meet. And I think, let's see, I gotta kick ahead here. One of the things that came up when we were talking about doing this session is how words matter and relationships matter. And so what we're going to try to do today is talk about how things are going in the current environment and really focus on how relationships are crucial to getting success for both sides of the negotiating table, and then really the importance of understanding the perspectives from all sides. And I used to tell my boss, first of all, the good news is it's a relationship business. And the bad news is it's a relationship business. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I had to remind him of, especially because hotels are so unique, is you can't negotiate with somebody effectively if you don't understand how they make their money and what's important to them. So we'll be talking about some of those things during the session today.
Maybe we can take a poll to see who's...
Well, first we're going to take a poll.
Good thinking, Gary.
We practiced this.
Yes.
So yes, there is a poll in the app. So please make sure you answer the question in the poll, because that will be whatever is the most voted on topic will be our third topic for today. And real quick, while you're doing that, a quick raise of hands, an informal poll. How many of you are meeting planners and/or third parties? Okay, good chunk. How many of you are hoteliers or other hospitality professionals?
Those are my peeps.
Split.
Those are my peeps.
Yeah, it's probably 60-40.
That's the point. That's
awesome.
great.
All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. But again, please make sure you answer the poll so we can cover the topic that's important to the most folks in the group. Mm-hmm. So first thing we're going to talk about is attendee behavior and attrition and what it does to the contracting process at the beginning, and then also what, the impact as you get closer to event operation. And Merit's just recently published a poll that gave some insights into when people are registering. And so we've got, 55% are registering a little ahead of time. But then you've only got, as you look along, it just drops off pretty quickly. And so you've got something like 45% of your attendees are registering within 4 weeks of the event.
Inside the 4 weeks.
Which most cutoff dates are right about 4 weeks. And so, you've got half of your attendees who haven't registered by the time your hotel cutoff happens. So I'll start with you, Tanya. Can you kind of share your experience with your clients and their attendees and how this kind of thing, first, are your clients experiencing similar patterns? And if so, what are you doing to try to mitigate that?
Cheating.
Hey.
Right? Where are my planners at? Right? So the reality is, and I think the statistic is so interesting, and I'll bet you anybody who runs this survey is going to get similar results, but all us planners, what we know is if you moved that to, if your registration deadline was 2 weeks before, you'd still have half of them after the 2-week deadline, right?
Yeah.
It's just the behavior of our attendees. So we end up, the success factor is relationship. Yeah. It's about communication. It's about talking with your hotel. So many times, and you can tell when you have a good relationship with a hotel or when you don't want to tell the hotel that you put fake names in. Let's be real. We're all putting fake names in, right?
And we know you put names.
Yeah, we try to avoid the celebrity names, but we use staff names, right? Yeah. And variations of staff names so that we can pick up on them because we know we're going to use them. And that's the importance in talking with the hotel is explaining, like, look at our pickup rate. Look at our own, as an agency, look at our experience rate, because sometimes maybe you don't have the history with that particular event, but you as an agency, you know your customer and you know this group and you can see over the months and months of planning that you've done already what the behavior is going to be like. So sure, we play it safe, and one of the very first things we'll ask the hotel is, what does your availability look like during that time that we're there? That's really, very important, because that's going to tell you the stress level of the hotel as well, and how tight you need to be. And again, going into relationships, how fair you need to be to the hotel. Don't hold all those rooms with those fake names and then give up your 20% or 10% attrition right at the last second, right? Depending on what you've negotiated. That's another part of the conversation. Yeah. But yeah, to me, it's all about building the relationship, communicating, being honest, and using fake names.
We'll have a word later, Tom.
I have something to add to that in just a minute. But Gary, let's talk to you about how properties are managing these cutoff dates and deadlines, and knowing that there are fake names, this little group secret that we've just all shared.
Well, and it goes back to how you started the conversation about relationships matter. And we are in a business where we have to understand what the business needs are and how do we mitigate some of that risk. And from a property perspective, whether it's an independent or a brand, it really one has to understand the makeup of the hotel, the destination, to really understand where that is and why we ask for the things we do in terms of the cutoff dates. Because there are some opportunities where we have flexibility, right? Where we want to be able to work and have the conversation to say, what do you need? Because sometimes when we were talking amongst ourselves earlier, when someone says, trust me on this one, and I go, yeah, okay, trust you on this one. The hotel's coming back to me as a global salesperson going, Gary, that's just a hope and a prayer, right? Yeah. And it's like, well, I've got history. Okay, well, tell me a little bit more. What's the nature of this group? Yes, even for myself, I don't plan things in advance. So sometimes I sit there going, all right, well, there's truth to that. So how do we come to understand what works well? So we can look at different ways to look at those cutoff dates. right? So that we don't have to do all the fake names, because it just doubles up the work, because the hotels that are here can probably empathize. Who wants to have your reservations team do double the work and having to do that? And then this is where mistakes happen. So I think that from the beginning, we have to have these conversations and understand, what is my business demand for a specific hotel? It makes a difference whether it's a 100-room hotel or a 7,000-room hotel we represent, and everything in between. So understanding that business will really help us come to an understanding between the planner and the supplier relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes they don't allow you to change the names. So depending on
There's a reason.
how strict, no, understood.
I'm kidding.
Fair enough, but they also want to sell the room. They don't want you to give up all the attrition and then be begging for rooms later or having to put someone else in a different hotel. So going back to the open communication and transparency, and you can tell, I'm pretty transparent. So
We
I build good
appreciate that.
relationships.
So for the suppliers in the room, we really appreciate when we can have those conversations rather than just a hope and a prayer, or seeing something come through and going, what happened to the rest of the rooms, right? We should be having conversations from earlier than the 4-week cutoff. And in negotiating in the contract stage, this is when we need to understand what that attendee behavior is and how that is.
Well, and I'll kind of share some of my experience, because one of the stats that were in the merits poll or the survey, were that a lot of the late registrants are first-timers, which that's a good thing for your event, because these are people who maybe they've been trying to convince their management that it's worth the investment to go. A lot of the late registrants are the exhibitors. And that's where a lot of times
Or coworkers.
the fake names will come from. Yeah, exhibitors or staff. So you're going to send, if you're a gold sponsor, you get an allotment of, say, 50 tickets, and you get an allotment at the Premier Hotel. I'm speaking from experience here, because we lived and died by sub-blocks when I was managing Microsoft's program, and so we would have those conversations with the hotel. It's like, well, I'm not going to name any of the sponsors, but this other big technology partner of ours has 50, and they haven't been able to decide who's going to come yet. So yes, there are 50 that are unused rooms, but they're going to get used. And then one tactic that sometimes comes into play is, and these were conversations that I would have, was, hey, put your money where your mouth is. If you know that they're going to take these 50 rooms, then guarantee them. And then I would go back to the sponsor manager and say, all right, they got to put their money where their mouth is, and they're either going to guarantee the rooms or they're going to put names on them. So those are all some things that it's the real life, and nobody's trying to pull anything over on anybody. It's just a matter of, again, why you really need to have these conversations. And then, I kind of alluded to this just now, but room block management, when you've got these late registrations, I was constantly having to talk with the housing manager about what's the pickup looking like, which of the blocks aren't performing, what can we do to, sometimes, there were times when I actually moved staff. If we had a hotel that wasn't performing, I would say, sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we're picking you up and we're moving you, because, I can't move a guest, but I can sure as heck move my colleagues.
And just from a supplier perspective, we want you to pick up, right?
Sure, of course.
And so it's about, in this day and age, how are we creative in partnering together, because there may be some marketing opportunities. There may be ways for us to feature our particular hotel as a way to incent the customer to buy early, basically, and to pick up in that way, especially if they're on their own to sort of book a reservation. So this is where involve us in the process. I think that sometimes we just do the standard ways of doing things and just say, let's just do the traditional room block management, but there are creative ways to establish some marketing things or tactics that really inspire and incent somebody to actually book earlier. So there could be ways where we can have a conversation based on what you know about your attendee.
Well, and in the corporate world, you know who your attendees are. So when I talk fake names, I'm kind of
More the client facing.
trying to be funny a little bit, but the truth is we're putting in names based on people we expect to come, right? But what happens is your executive management doesn't know if they can come yet. They're not going to know until a week out or 2 weeks out. So you put their name in, you hope they can come, but they can't come, so their colleague's coming. So guess what? I'm doing a name change, right? And so that's where I really appreciate the name changes. So many times, like all of our coworkers, we don't even send out the invites to the coworkers until all of the attendees have registered because they're more important. And if we have to cut the block in half of the coworkers in order to get everyone in and still fit within budget, right? So there's just, it's so complex.
But again, from a contract standpoint, when we're negotiating, if we know that that's happening, let's talk about how that is in the contract. Because I was involved in different contracts where that happens, but you know it's going to pick up. You know the names of the executives may come, but you may have to switch them out. But then if we can incorporate what that is into the agreement, we're able to come to an understanding of how this is all going to work. And expectations, setting the expectations too.
I think the theme of the day is communicate.
Well, and then, some things, I mean, from the impact of actually managing the event. We talked about the room block management, but, your food and beverage cutoffs are looming large too at that four-week mark. So you've got your guarantees that you want to worry about. Then there's, the talk about food waste. And so I think, as planners in particular, you've got to be really looking at your history and making sure you know kind of what, or at least what you can expect to be working with your numbers and try to mitigate as best as you can. But I think that's why we call it, what are we, number 3 on the top 10 most stressful
jobs in the world?
But it's why we love
food
it.
and beverage is a particularly hard one because even if you know your audience, you then have to really work with the hotel to understand the destination. Because if you're in Las Vegas, you could easily lose your people for dinner. They're off having dinner somewhere else in the hotel, right?
Yep.
And so understanding what your attrition is going to be for your food and beverage and really working, I'm sorry with that. I really, again, appreciate the relationships. I've never, ever had a hotel on the food and beverage side not work with me on the cutoff date for the food and beverage because they also don't want to waste the food, right? Yeah. But they have to buy it. Yeah. And when you've got 1,000 or 3,000 people coming in for a lunch or whatever, they need to know how much they're buying, right? So, but they're so thoughtful about, okay, can we replenish? Can we have less? I don't know how many people are actually going to show up.
Even from a negotiation standpoint, when it gets to that point, we as a hotel may have certain access to certain foods. So can we switch out, right?
Yeah.
Are there opportunities for? So this is where the flexibility comes in the conversation going, all right, if you're going to get closer to that point, we may need to switch this out. I know you said this is the way it needs.
Or if we replenish, can we replenish with something different than what was on the initial menu? Yeah. Absolutely. And so I find food and beverage, if you guys aren't already negotiating that, even, and I hate to say it in front of you, Gary, but even after the contract's set, they are always so open to working with you on those deadlines. So just reach out and explain your situation, and they can probably come to you with a really good solution. I have to mention this, and I know we're ready to move on, but I think I'll just say we do over 300 events a year, and we are finally seeing some leveling off of pre-pandemic behavior. So if you aren't, you will soon. What really happened after the pandemic is everybody was so excited to come back, and there was so much hype in the air that we all were like, okay, we're gonna have 1,000 people at this event, and 600 showed up. And you were like, what happened? Everybody said they wanted to come. Sure. But we are finally getting back to that, being able to recognize that, or realize is the word I'm looking for, the actual number of people that you're anticipating. So the good news is that is leveling.
And we are seeing that as well, and I put it out there to my fellow suppliers, but it's about really blocking and contracting the most appropriate and not thinking that, okay, all of a sudden you're going to have this many more people or this many less people. Really finding the realistic block.
And that was hard to do, though, coming out of the pandemic.
And
that
now
was
it's
like
stabilized a lot more.
Impossible. Yeah. And that's my point, is it has stabilized. If you're not experiencing that, you will soon. We're seeing it across a lot of our colleagues.
What we do appreciate, though, is if you start to see a pickup quicker, right? Sometimes we find that it comes too late. So the more you advance any trends, any things that you see to us on the hotel side or the venue perspective, it just helps us to help you, the planner, more in preparation and planning.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to the next topic, and this was one that I've heard both sides of the story. You know, should you attach your required terms to the RFP?
Is that why you're sitting in the middle and we're like,
I am. It's kind of like point and counterpoint. You know, and when I heard that some people don't attach their terms, I was a little taken aback, and I think there's sometimes as a reason because they don't want to, you know, reveal everything all at once. But when it comes to, especially in today's market where, you know, I mean, hotels are being just pummeled, for lack of a better word, with just piles and piles and piles of RFPs. If they don't know really what your deal breakers are, must-haves at the beginning, both sides can waste a lot of time. And so we've got, you know, must-haves and common clauses, and then, you know, how hotels are going to be in a position to respond to some of these. And there are a few that I'm just going to put up on the screen.
And I just want to mention that that's a really big point from us as a supplier perspective. We really appreciate the tools that advance and make things quicker, like the Cvent tool. What we don't appreciate is when the client hides behind the RFP, and I think you were alluding to that, is that sometimes we need the more information. And as a supplier, the information you provide us that's critical is most important up front, because it's almost like a aha afterwards once we finish the going, well, I wish we would have known some of this earlier. And this is what I mean by not hiding behind the RFP and saying, you know, this is what we're presenting, but you're trying to present the pretty thing just to get the response, and then it's really not exactly what you want.
Well, and I've put these clauses up, and we don't have time to go through them individually. And actually, I'm happy to say this is my third year at Cvent Connect. And my first year, I went through quite a few of these contract clauses. And I actually have a copy of that presentation on my website, and you'll get a chance to download that a little later. But one thing that when we were preparing, Gary was talking about his F words. And we were like,
I have a lot. No,
What? I like that.
oh, he loves an F-bomb. But, you know, he was talking about flexibility, focus on the relationships, and then facts first. So maybe, Gary, you could talk a little bit about what you meant by
I
that.
find that the best way for us to come to an understanding, and it wasn't just necessarily F words, but I just thought it was funny.
It is funny.
It's about us having flexibility on both sides, right? I think that when we communicate, we have to understand there are a lot of must-haves, but there are a lot of things that are fluid. So let's have a conversation, an open conversation about what those things are. Also it goes back to how you started it, which is so critical, is let's focus on the relationship. Right? We are in a relationship business, as you have mentioned as we started the session. We're not adversaries here. We want, as a supplier, to create and execute a memorable program for you, and we want it to be successful so that you come back again. And we want to make sure that that program is flawlessly executed to the way that you would like that. But also the facts first, I mean by understanding how business is being done in a property. So when you ask for certain things, know, you know, what it is that we evaluate and look at that's the most important, what's the most profitable, where we have the most flexibility. So sometimes when, I'll speak for a GSO, but also from a hotel, when I look at something, I go, really, they want that? I mean, okay, well, we're going to say no to that because that's, you know, unheard of. But there are certain places that we can flex. So let's have that conversation. So I said facts first is really understanding the way that the hotels and our venues operate so that we can come to a solution as to where we can reach a common solution in terms of mitigating expenses, executing flawless events, and achieving your business objectives from that event.
What are your thoughts?
So I think we do have an addendum that we send out with every RFP, and of course we use CSN. Huge fans. I have another session tomorrow. But anyway, I think where the secret sauce is figuring out what to put in there, because you also don't want to turn the hotel away, right? You don't want to say, I must have a force majeure that fits this. Your clients are telling you that. but right? Like, you're going to be able to flex a little bit.
Yeah.
There are certain things that I don't flex on, and I have a great story about a negotiation with Disney and their 7 lawyers against me one time, but that's another time. But I think that really being willing to constantly evolve what that addendum looks like and what's important to you, and I think separating, what was the word you used earlier? It was like must-haves or...
Well, the considerations, like what are the things that if you, in working with a few clients, there are certain things that must be done, like in order for you to be selected, and you don't want to get to the point where they've swiped right for you and you're like, all right, we're ready to go, and they said, I can't do that, right? So had we known that from before, it would allow us to negotiate some of those things on the front end.
Yeah, so I think there's the must-haves, but there's also the like-to-haves, right? Because then when they're going to make up the contract, if they've already seen that you want a 2-week cutoff for attrition, or that you require cumulative instead of per night, or all of the things that you always end up renegotiating at the very end, and then it ends up being the back and forth. I think the addendum should say, these are my must-haves, right? Like, I can't move forward with you. Don't even bother responding unless you can do these things. And then these are the things we like to see in a contract, and give them that heads up on it. So right up front, they can be telling you, hey, by the way. And that way, if you're down to a couple of properties, and this one's saying, I'll give you the 2-week cutoff, and this one's saying, nope, 4 weeks, then you might make a decision based on that.
And we appreciate that from and I'm speaking for the suppliers in the room. If we know that ahead of time, it's very helpful for us to be able to evaluate. But many of our hotels also have to have stakeholders that you have to present to, or you're trying to evaluate business that other colleagues are doing. So if we know these things, it helps us to really understand, and helps us to sell the program within the hotel too.
Well, and I think, like I said, listings, these are some of the clauses that, you might want to include, and setting the standards or setting the expectations with a particular property around what the service needs to be, what the event experience needs to be. There are competitive circumstances. Coke will always have a Coke clause that they can't serve Pepsi or vice versa. When I was at Microsoft, we had tech exclusions where certain other companies could not be co-located with us at our time because of, confidentiality and things like that. So those are the things that you want to put in up front. And one of the things that I teach, I teach MPI's contract negotiation course, and, everybody wants to get in and get the perfect clause for everything. And what I tell people is, number one, we're not negotiating for hostages' lives, thank goodness. That's probably the number one stressful job. But don't spend your time arguing over something that's not going to be of risk to you. And Tanya just brought up, cumulative versus per night attrition. And, the planners always want cumulative and the hotels always want per night. But there's no point in really spending a ton of time and energy if this is a program that it's particularly an internal program, people are gonna come, you're not gonna have risk of attrition. So leave that one alone. If you can't come to an agreement, don't waste a ton of time on it, because it really only matters if you're gonna face that risk. So I think, the poll came up with venue availability and creating an RFP, and I think it's kind of a tag on to what we've just been talking about. So I think, there's been, I would say in the last 2 years, kind of a swing back and forth of how much detail should you put into an RFP? And then others are saying, well, don't make us answer 48 questions, because we may not even have the availability. And so one of the things that I've talked to with my clients and folks that come to my Ask Me Anything is send the RFP and then pick up the phone and make sure that the hotel knows that you have sent the RFP, it's a legit lead, and that there are only 3 or 4 other properties under consideration at this time. And Gary and I have talked about that all the time. Your best friend is the phone. But
CSN.
Yeah.
That's my best friend.
Well, but after you've put it in, then
You can still send a private message to
Yeah,
them, and it makes it easier because
Yeah.
you can actually send a message to 4 people all at once saying, hey, by the way, you're one of my favorites. You're the one I'm going to be really
And
pushing
actually,
for.
as a global salesperson, we see that as well. So
Yeah.
we support our hotels, and when we see that note that says, you know what, we're coming down to the wire, you're still in the running, and it again, you're not really hiding behind the RFP anymore. You're
Yeah.
Right.
giving us the information that says, all right, I have a chance here out of all these RFPs that we're going to make it, and I think that kind of communication is very appreciated, because otherwise we're just sort of sitting here wondering what's happening to this RFP. It's out in some oblivion until.
Well, and that's, I think that applies to all RFPs,
Sure.
not just hotel RFPs.
Right.
And,
You can do special venues and
Well,
restaurants.
or even your service providers. And, a lot of clients hire me to run their RFPs for their big scale suppliers for a large scale conference, because, there's a lot of time and effort that goes into that. You have to have a well-written scope of work. You have to have a well-defined timeline, and you have to stick to it. And, the principles that go into a good, just general RFP apply here for hotels too, where if this is going to be your decision timeline, let the property know that and do your dangdest to stick to it. And I realize, especially for the third-party planners, the clients don't always let you do that. And I can tell you from just when I was in the corporate side, the stakeholders all had very unrealistic ideas of how you could go about doing this. But answering questions, being transparent as best you can about what you really need, and for the love of all things, include your budget. Because, I'm just going to guess that there are quite a few people who are going to say, no, I'm not going to do that. But if you don't, and I've sat on both sides of that, if you don't include at least the ballpark of what your budget is. I think we heard today there are 4,000 attendees here at Cvent Connect. And I don't know what their budget is, but it could range anywhere from 10 million to 40 million, or somewhere below that, depending on how much production value is, what the food and beverage experience is going to be like, if there are going to be giveaways or what kind of swag is going to be put out there. If you don't give some kind of a ballpark, one of your suppliers could come in at the $40 million mark, and the other one could come in at the $10 million mark, and you are somewhere in the middle. How do you choose an agency that's going to be able to deliver what you want when you haven't really set the expectation? So I realize I've kind of diverted off of.
Well, for clarity, I think what you're saying is for corporate that is asking for an agency, give the budget that you need to work within.
Correct.
Because as an third-party event planner,
Right.
I'm not giving the hotel my budget. And I know that it gives you that option. But the reality is I've been able to work the numbers where the customer thought I was going to give them a $350 room, and I was able to give them an $1,100 room.
So
All in their budget.
But from a
So
contract
I don't want the hotel to be limited.
And I agree with you, and I'm on both sides. I think to both sides of it.
Yeah.
As a supplier, though, it's very helpful for us, not maybe the whole budget, but when we're determining our minimums, our food and beverage, how we're going to contract, because we're talking about how we're going to negotiate this. If you have past history, there's so many RFPs that I see, and I defer to my fellow suppliers that don't have that information. So while it's not a budget, if we knew how much you were spending, how many meals you've done in the past, it helps us to really go and pitch what we need to do to sell the program too. We want, like as an individual salesperson, I want that program. So help me to sell it within it. And if we have information in terms of some of that budget numbers, that really helps. What have you paid in the past for room rate, right? Am I out of the ballpark? Do I need to sharpen my pencil? How much have you spent on food and beverage? Where do we have flex on that? This is the kind of general budget numbers that are helpful for us.
Well, and I think, I'll just chime in there real quick. I think that a good planner is, they're going to choose the properties that they should choose the properties that are most likely to be able to accommodate the budget. And, and when I was running Venue Source, we would have, stakeholders who wanted the Ritz, but they didn't want to pay more than a DoubleTree price. And I was like, sorry, folks, you know, you've got to set a realistic expectation. And I really, you know, counseled my sourcing team to stick with those principles. So,
well, it's interesting though, because when I see so many different, from my vantage point as a GSO, hotels have different food and beverage minimums and everything, and it's really interesting. It's the same program, but it ranges, right? So if we had an understanding of where you needed to be, it helps us to get to a, because the client will come back and go, why is your hotel on this end of one and on the other end? And, and the level of hotel is equal. And it's really about the one saying, well, they're going to make the food and beverage anyway, so let's contract a little lower, but we know we're going to get in the end. So there's different tactics and approaches, so it's just understanding where that is in terms of what past history of what's been spent and everything like that.
Yeah, when you've got that history, I think, you know, a lot of those examples that you gave are when you have that history. So many times you don't have the history, and it's
what
the
do you
type
want
of
to maybe
event.
spend per person or something?
Well, but it's the type of event. And I don't know about you guys. Can I actually have a show of hands? My boss comes from the hospitality industry. He comes from Hyatt and Disney. Yes, that's how I met him. But can I have a show of hands? How many people are selling your events based on the per person cost? That's what I wanted to hear. I think we're all away from that. We're not saying, oh, this event's going to cost you $2,500 a person. We just don't do it that way anymore. Yeah. We have gotten so skilled and creative, right? Which is what they're driving us to do, be creative. Okay, we're being creative, just like the example I gave earlier of an incentive trip where the customer thought it was going to be a $350 room night. And I was able to give them $1,100 and still give them everything that they wanted on their agenda, right? And more, frankly, by being creative. So I think, yeah, if you've got just a traditional year over year, we have one that's $200 a night in Las Vegas, 4-star hotel, like it's the same thing. We know what the food and beverage is gonna be, the agenda's always the same. Sure, that's great. But we're all getting creative these days. And even those year over year, our customers going, okay, well now show me something different. Show me a different agenda. Show me a different kind of hotel. Show me a different way to handle the food and beverage. So I think if you have those kind of requirements, you put it in. We used to put food and beverage requirements in our concession requests. We almost never do anymore because it's like, let's work with the hotel. You might, to your point, you might have a hotel that's got a really, really high F&B, but you're like, yeah, but have you seen the way they display it? Have you seen the food they serve? Like,
And then this is where we talked about the communication and, you know, not hiding behind the RFP. How do we have conversations like that? Because we appreciate information and any insight because that also helps us to be able to determine how to best work with that particular program.
So we're running out of time. This has gone so quickly.
We could go on for hours.
We could probably go on for hours. And there is actually a session that I'll show you to a little later as we're wrapping up. But one of the questions that got upvoted was, what would be some examples of those marketing tactics that hotels could assist with to encourage room reservations by attendees? So I think that one goes to you.
Sure. So what I've seen is when, for example, you have a multiple group of hotels, if there's something that you can give to the guest that, when I say marketing, it's more about
like amenity,
or something that if the first 100 have registered, and we can figure that out, of course, because we have that information, they are entitled to blank. So there's different things that you could do to create where we're helping you to sell it. Because if you put it in and market it out saying, hey, you know what, here are the hotels. This hotel, if you're the first 100 to sign up, you get, I don't know, it's a bunch of things. Some people can give, well, I represent mostly independent hotels, so.
Loyalty points or things like that.
Yeah, do you get a drink coupon when you arrive? Do you get, you know, a complimentary coffee in the morning or, you know, coffee and pastry or best? It just helps us to get that, to get the program booked and running. It doesn't necessarily happen for every type of program, but from a marketing standpoint, just understand what in your hotel it's flexible for you to provide that's easily providable and doesn't have high cost, but a perceived value. So if that guest is signing up and you're incenting them, what is it that's a perceived value?
Well, even from a marketing perspective, we pay tens of thousands of dollars for some of these hype videos, right? And going to your CVB or going to your hotel and saying, hey, we're just not getting the attendance. Can you either sponsor one or give us one that you've already professionally produced? That's another way to get the communication out.
So here's one. What are some of the most common concessions a hotel can be flexible on that we may not know about as the third party or maybe the planners?
Okay.
Yeah, you. That's a you.
You're in the hot seat now, Gary. Let's keep him there.
Well, I'm just speaking on behalf of all of you, but I would encourage anyone who has different ideas and stuff, because we're just seeing it from a GSO perspective. But understanding what that particular hotel is. So it's a difference between a corporate city hotel versus a resort.
Right.
There are opportunities where there are welcome, I'm going back to this whole marketing thing, are there welcome drinks that we set up? If you've come to different industry conferences, you know how things are set up in the lobby. Can we set things up that are indicative of the destination that creates an experience? So it's not just about giving away a free thing, but what is it that is, again, a perceived value, but to the client creates an experience for them when they're staying at your particular venue that incents them to either be loyal to the brand again, be loyal to that particular hotel. So there are certain things, like even there may be a wellness class, right? Maybe it's really understanding the group, and if this group is really here for wellness, could you offer that wellness class as a concession that says in the morning, we'll take you for a morning walk, right? It doesn't really cost us. There's always a cost, but it's a perceived what is it that we can do for you. And I was just at an advisory board, and that's what this hotel was big on wellness and provided that whole, brought in the yoga instructor, and it was kind of the perceived added value to it.
Yeah, I'll add to that. One of Fusion's tips is really get to know the destination and the hotel. And notice the kinds of promotions that they're putting on their websites of classes that they're offering or giveaways that they have. Definitely hit up your CVB. If you're not hitting up your CVB every time you're going into a market, even if it's just an incentive trip, you're missing out, because you could literally get raw cash, right, for going to a particular destination. But many times they also have things that they can give you and that you can put in welcome packets and things like that. Yeah. So look at what's on the CVB's website, look at what's on your hotel's website, and be following that in the months leading up to your event, and then you know what to ask for.
I think we traditionally, when negotiating on both sides, we always, whether you're a supplier or planner, you're thinking about the traditional things that you're like, okay, is it food and beverage costs, the AV, all right, it's a 10% off this, or let's look beyond it and be creative, let's be innovative. Every group is different, so what is it that an incentive group is going to be very different from a traditional corporate group, so what do we do to create that unique experience? So
we have time for maybe one or two more, and I went ahead and put up our keep in touch slides. So I mentioned a little earlier, I've got a contract resource page, so my QR code has that, and Gary and Tanya both have their LinkedIn profiles, so you can follow us, keep in touch, and keep the conversation going. Real quick, Kelly, just give me a nod. There are a lot of questions that I know we're not going to be able to answer today. Is there a way that we can answer them and post them for attendees to look at later? Yes. Okay, perfect. So we can. Perfect, awesome. All right, so I think at least our one more question is, when asking for a 24-hour hold on meeting space in the contract to allow our IUV team to set up, are there any best practices? And I'll start with you first, because I think you've probably experienced that.
All the time. Yeah, so one of the things that we always try to ask a hotel or venue or restaurant even is who's in there before us, so that you understand what kind of challenges they might have in their teardown that might affect your being able to get in. Or, more importantly, are they going to be out half a day earlier than maybe you have it contracted and you can come in a half a day earlier? Especially when you're getting down to that final 4 to 6 weeks before an event. Hotels are incredibly flexible on, hey, our other group's going to be out the morning before you get there. Do you need to come in a day earlier, especially for our war rooms, right? Yeah. So I would definitely recommend talking to your CSM and finding out who's in there before. And then even for teardown's also a big one, because sometimes that means you're putting in overtime to your AV people to get your teardown done by midnight, right, or whatever it is. Find out if there's even anybody in there for the next 2 days. Maybe you don't need to be paying overtime, and they can come in the next day.
Or sometimes if you're able to find the group ahead of you or behind you, sometimes you can actually share production, where you're not having to tear down the thing that they're gonna come in and set right back up again. Yep. And we did that a lot, where we were able to get advance access to a ballroom or even an exhibit hall, because we were willing to go in and pre-install, let the group in front of us use it, and then we came in with plenty of time to spare.
Especially with Encore owning the planet at this point, right? Like, they've already set up the stage. You might as well not incur the labor of them tearing it down and resetting it up. Of course, they want to do that, exactly. But
well, and that has to be the last word, because we just hit the countdown clock. But I mentioned that there's another session that is tomorrow, where it's an attendee meetup for venue sourcing and enhancing collaboration. So I'm going to be at that. I think both Gary and Tanya will be there too. And then, grab any of us in the hallway and ask questions, because I know I love answering questions.
Absolutely.
And keep
Thank
the
you, everyone,
conversation
for
going.
coming.
So thank you so much. Oh, and one more. Don't forget to
take the survey.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen.
Have a great show.
Thank you.